welcome to another episode of Kev's Defender Project. Now today we're going to be addressing an oil leak that's been making a mess of my drive, and I've had a look. It looks like it's coming from just below the cylinder head. So what we're going to need to do is take those off because it's probably the head gasket. Now, while it's a fairly straightforward job, it's quite involved because it means taking everything off that's above the cylinder heads to get at them. So it's probably going to take quite a while. So with that in mind, let's go and get started. So before we start, we're going to disconnect the battery, drain the coolant, and then drain the oil. So after that, we need to start tearing the engine down. So first comes off the plenum cover, then the plenum itself, fan belt, alternator, now at this point we're going to need to put clamps on the fuel lines so we don't have to drain all the fuel system, because we're going to be taking the fuel rail off. Then the fuel rail comes off. Now the injectors may be a bit tricky. Right, now what I suggest you do with the the steering pump is, because it's all plumbed into a bunch of steering fluid and you don't want to have to drain all that, I would suggest you just grab a piece of wire or a really long cable tie and then just hook it up to something to hold it out of the way, like so. Once that's out of the way, we can remove the rocker covers. Then the intake manifold. And then finally the valley gasket. Don't lose things inside the engine. Right, so now we've got all those bits off, there's just a few more things to disconnect and we can start taking the cylinder heads off. Now this tensioner pulley and alternator mount are disconnected, the bolts are out where they connect to the cylinder head. I'm just going to leave it in place because we do have enough room to manoeuvre. The only things we've got left to get off are the manifolds, which I'm probably just going to grab some wire like I did with the steering pump and just hang them out of the way. And we've got to disconnect the HT leads as well, because obviously they're connected to the spark plugs. So, one thing to remember, to save you a lot of time when you're putting it back together, is to label things. So I'm going to label HT leads so that I know which order they go back on in. Now, the connectors for the fuel injectors, actually I don't know if you can see that, they were labelled when the guy who built the wiring loom for me, he put little labels on them already, so that's why I didn't bother with those. So here we've just got 8 bolts on each side for the manifold. We've got to disconnect and label all the HT leads. Then I'm going to grab some cable ties, cable tie all the cables out of the way, and then we should be good to get started taking the cylinder heads off. Right, so now we've got the manifolds unbolted and tied up out of the way, we can finally get the cylinder heads off. Now when you put them on, you have to torque the bolts up in a very specific order to avoid warping the heads. So to avoid warping them as we take it off, we're going to have to undo the bolts in the opposite order. Now the order that they go on is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we're going to have to do the opposite of that as we undo them a little bit at a time, which is 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I'm going to now go and get a breaker bar because, as I said, these are torqued up very heavily to avoid any leakage, which obviously wasn't happening before because we've got oil going everywhere, and that's the point of doing this job. Okay, so now we've got the heads off, we'll give them a quick once over. This is the left-hand one as you're looking from the front of the car, so this is 2, 4, 6 and 8. Everything looks okay visually, there's nothing obvious. If we turn it over, then you look at the valves, you can see they're fairly even brown colour. Now what's interesting is this cylinder is a slightly different colour. This one was missing the gasket on the exhaust manifold, so that may explain that. Before we go any further, we'll check the head to see if it's square, to make sure it hasn't been warped or not. Hopefully if I hold it up to that camera, this is a very specifically ground straight level, and as we go across the head, apart from where there's a little bit of crap on there, we can see that block is square, so I'm very, very happy with that. Now what we normally do is just give it a bit of a clean up, and then after we've fitted the studs, we put it back on. What I'm going to do is, seeing as it's out, I'm going to send it off to a company that do porting, which is where they'll refine the intake and exhaust ports and grind the valves again, just to give it a little bit of a better aerodynamic flow, which should improve the performance a little bit. So now we've got those off, I just need to take the rocker arms and the pedestals off, then I'll get them packaged up and sent off. And then we wait a couple of weeks, and then we can start getting everything put back on again. Well, the heads are back after being worked on, and they're lovely and shiny. Don't think I've ever seen a head quite as clean as this. But more importantly, they've done some work porting out the inlets and the exhaust. So lift this up, you should be able to see inlet and the exhaust valves are incredibly smooth now, and they've widened them out a little bit. Now this is going to let the air in and out of the engine, so letting it breathe a lot more easily, which should result in a bit more power. And also, if we turn it over, they've replaced the valves with slightly bigger ones, so they've had to grind out the valve, put new valve seats in and fit the valves as well. So these heads are all ready to go back on. Now I'm not going to use the standard stretch bolts that normally put the cylinder heads on. I'm a big fan of over-engineering, so I've actually bought these ARP cylinder head studs, which, if we have a look, instead of it being a normal bolt, we've actually got a stud there with different threads on each end. So one end goes into the engine block as normal, and then we have nuts and washers to fix them onto. And the great thing about this, or why we would do this upgrade, is that then when you're tightening things up, you're not putting turning stress and pulling stress on the engine block, which means you're less likely to strip a thread. And these are also going to go down a lot more easily. They'll line up much better because you can line the head up over the studs and then put the nuts on the top. Now this does mean that we're going to need to go through a few jobs actually on the vehicle. One of the things is they recommend you clean out the holes in the block before you put them in. So we've got here a 7/16 tap, which I'm going to go and tap all the holes with. I did one earlier just to see what it's like, and I don't know if you can see that, all that gunk. So that's the stuff that's actually sitting in the threads of the block, and we want to really get that, all that gunk out, so we can get a nice clean connection. So next thing is grab these and join me outside. Right, now as I was saying inside, we need to tap these holes just to make sure the threads are nice and clean. So I've got that 7/16 tap we were talking about. So we'll just run it all the way in and all the way out, and you can see even on that hole. There's some crap in there. So I'm going to go ahead and clean this off and do the rest of them. So come back in a second and we'll put the studs in. Right, so now all the studs are in. Next thing to do is fit a nice new head gasket. I've got one here. It does have a nice top marking on it, so you know which way around it goes. So it goes on just like that. So here's my nice shiny cylinder head. So the next job is to put the washers and the nuts on. A nice little bag of washers here. Just put one of those on. And before we put the nuts on, we've got this stuff in the pack, this fastener assembly lubricant. Now it goes on about some kind of, this is better than motor oil, it's more even when you're torquing things down, which I don't really understand, but all I do know is that we've got to put it on before we put the nuts on. So I'm just going to get a little bit on this foam brush and just brush a little bit on all the threads. Now we've got a bag of nuts. These are quite fancy nuts actually, so just, that says do not finger tight, so I'm just going to do that. Right, now the next step is to torque the nuts. Now the instructions for the ARP bolt say 80 pounds-feet of pressure in 3 steps, and it says use the manufacturer's order of the tightening, which, if you remember from the first section, is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm not going to make you watch that because it's going to take a while, so come back when I've done that. Now unfortunately the memory card that had the footage of me putting the engine back together on got corrupted, so I can't show you that unfortunately, but it's obviously just the reverse of everything we took off. Now once you've done all that, you'll have a nice put back together engine, and so I treated myself after I'd got all that done to a set of headman headers. Now they're pre-cast all the way down, they go right back down somewhere down there, back to basically flush with the bulkhead, and then I actually got myself a custom stainless exhaust bill. So it's got 2 exits at the back and 2 tips on each of them. So this is what it looks like. I'll scroll underneath so you can hopefully see the whole thing. And then, just as a little treat before we finish, this is what it sounds like. And there you have it. As I said at the beginning, it's a simple job, but it is quite involved. And I think the addition of the custom exhaust gives it that proper V8 sound, so I'm very happy. Now, thanks for watching. If you like what I do, please subscribe to my channel, and join me again next time when I'll be doing something else in the Land Rover.